Imagine waking up one morning, grabbing your coffee and heading out, only to find a solid concrete wall blocking your driveway. No warning. No explanation. Just a smug HOA president standing nearby, watching you struggle with a satisfied smirk. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And trust me, that was only the beginning of this nightmare. What I uncovered next. Let's just say Karen was hiding a lot more than bad attitude and rulebooks. Buckle up because this story gets wild. Jake Carter had always imagined homeownership would be a dream come true. Weekend barbecues, quiet evenings on the porch, maybe even befriending the neighbors. What he hadn't imagined was dealing with Karen Whitmore, the HOA president from hell, a woman with the personality of a traffic cop on a power trip and the pettiness of a schoolyard bully. The neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates, looked like something straight out of a real estate commercial. Pristinely trimmed hedges, symmetrical houses with perfectly coordinated shutters, and an eerie absence of anything remotely unique. Every house looked the same, like some Stepford-esque dystopia, and the homeowners association made sure it stayed that way. Jake and his wife Emily had moved in only 2 months ago, lured by the affordability of the house and the promise of a peaceful life. But the moment they signed on the dotted line, Karen had been there, hovering like a vulture. "I just love new homeowners," she'd said the first time they met, handing them a 37-page HOA rulebook with a grin that never reached her eyes. So much to learn. Since then they had received friendly violations for having a bird feeder, attracts undesirable wildlife, using the wrong shade of mulch, deep cedar not rustic oak, and leaving their garbage bin out 5 minutes past pickup time. Jake had thought those were just minor inconveniences until now. It started with the electricity issue. One Friday night as Jake was brushing his teeth, the lights flickered. Not a normal flicker but a weird rhythmic pattern. On off, long pause then off again. "Did you see that?" he called to Emily. "Huh." She was already in bed, scrolling on her phone. "The lights. They're blinking. It's like freaking Morse code." She glanced up. Probably just the grid. "It's been windy." Jake frowned. Maybe she was right. But something about the flickering felt deliberate. The next morning it happened again. This time the garage door wouldn't open. He pressed the button. Nothing. Seriously. He checked the power. Out. The fridge, the outlets, the lights. Everything in the garage was dead. He checked the breaker box. Everything seemed fine. "Maybe it's the main line?" Emily suggested. Jake sighed and called the electric company, expecting some easy explanation. Instead he got a confused technician. "Sir, according to our system your house is fully powered," the man said. "What?" "No, I'm standing in my garage and it's dead." "That's odd," the tech muttered. "Let me run a diagnostic." Pause. Then, "Sir, your electrical feed was manually disconnected." Jake blinked. "What do you mean manually?" "Like, someone physically shut off your power at the external breaker." "Do you have any reason to believe someone tampered with it?" Jake's stomach twisted. He marched outside to check, but the panel was locked, with a brand new padlock that wasn't his. What the hell? He rattled it. Who had done this? And why? Then out of the corner of his eye he saw Karen standing by her pristine flower bed, sipping from a HOA-branded coffee mug, watching him with the self-satisfied smile of a Bond villain. Jake exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to launch himself over the picket fence. "Hey Karen," he said tightly. "Any idea why there's a mystery lock on my breaker box?" "Oh," she gasped in mock surprise. "That's HOA property now. We had to take action after multiple violations." Jake narrowed his eyes. "What violations?" Karen said. "Your garage lighting was unapproved." "What the? Why garage lighting?" She nodded, looking disgusted. "I happen to notice that your bulbs are 5000 K daylight. HOA guidelines clearly state that exterior-facing lights must be 2700 K warm white for aesthetic harmony." Jake stared. "You're telling me you shut off my power because my light bulbs were too white?" "Oh, of course not," she laughed. "That would be ridiculous." For a split second, relief. "I shut it off because you ignored my request to change them," she continued sweetly. Jake had to take a breath before he said something that would make him instantly evicted. "Karen, you can't just cut off my power over light bulbs." "Oh, but I can," she chirped. "The HOA owns the exterior panel." "That's not how that works." "Oh, but it is. You agreed to HOA oversight when you bought the house. Jake wanted to argue, but a sinking realization hit him. He hadn't read all 37 pages of that stupid rulebook. Emily, who had walked out mid-conversation, placed a hand on his arm. So let me get this straight, she said calmly. You're holding our power hostage until we change our light bulbs? Karen gave her a smug little nod. Jake was fuming, but Emily's face suddenly brightened. Oh. No problem, she said sweetly. We'll take care of it today. Karen beamed. Wonderful. Compliance is key. And with that she sauntered away. Jake turned to Emily. Why did you say that? We shouldn't cave. He grinned. Because I have a better idea. An hour later they swapped out exactly one garage bulb with a dim, flickering 2700K, then strategically aimed a floodlight into Karen's bedroom window. That night at exactly 3 a.m. the screaming began. By sunrise, Karen was furious, stomping over in her fuzzy slippers, hair askew. This is harassment, she shrieked. Jake shrugged. It's 2700K, HOA compliant. You know exactly what you're doing. Do I? He gave her his best innocent look. Karen stormed away, fuming, but by noon the padlock was gone and their power was back. Jake and Emily high-fived. Victory. Or so they thought. Because the next morning they woke up to something even worse. Their driveway, completely blocked by a solid concrete wall. Jake stared at the concrete wall blocking his driveway, his mind struggling to process the sheer insanity of it. He rubbed his eyes, half expecting it to disappear like some ridiculous optical illusion. Nope. Still there. A real, solid 4-foot-thick concrete wall. Emily came stumbling out behind him in her pajamas, clutching a coffee mug. She squinted at the obstruction, then at Jake. Babe, she said slowly. Am I still asleep, or did someone actually build a medieval fortress at the end of our driveway? Jake exhaled through his nose. I was hoping you could tell me. A familiar voice cleared its throat. They turned in unison. Karen. She stood at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, her lips curved into the same self-satisfied smirk that made Jake's fists itch. Oh, good morning, neighbors, she trilled. I see you noticed the new improvement. Jake's brain short-circuited. Improvement? You built a wall in front of my driveway. Karen clutched her chest as if he had accused her of arson. I didn't build anything. The HOA approved a beautification project to enhance the community's aesthetics. Jake's eye twitched. So it's just a coincidence that this beautification happens to completely block my driveway? Karen's smile widened. Well, I did warn you about your non-compliant driveway. It was an eyesore. This is much more harmonious. Emily put a calming hand on Jake's shoulder, but he could feel the heat rising in his chest. This has to be illegal. Karen sighed dramatically. Actually, the HOA owns the easement adjacent to all driveways. We're allowed to make necessary modifications for the benefit of the neighborhood. She gave a condescending nod toward the wall. And this is very necessary. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. Karen, how do you expect us to park? Oh, plenty of homeowners park on the street, she said cheerfully. You'll just need to apply for an overnight permit. It's only $75 per month. Jake gawked. You're telling me that after illegally blocking my driveway, you now want me to pay you for a street parking permit? Well, not me, she laughed. The HOA. Jake turned on his heel, marched inside, and called the police. The law has entered the chat. The cop who arrived, Officer Martinez, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with the weary expression of someone who had seen it all. He listened patiently as Jake explained the situation. Then he turned to Karen. Ma'am, you're admitting that the HOA constructed this wall without the homeowner's consent? Karen clasped her hands in front of her, her tone syrupy sweet. Oh, officer, this is a HOA-mandated project. Not my decision at all. Just following regulations. Martinez frowned. Do you have a permit for this construction? Karen's smile froze. Jake felt a spark of hope. Well, Karen hedged. HOA projects don't always require permits per se. That's not how that works, Martinez cut in. He turned to Jake. Sir, this structure is blocking your access to your property. That's illegal. Jake almost collapsed with relief. So you can make them tear it down? Martinez looked at Karen. Ma'am, You need to provide legal documentation showing HOA approval and municipal permits. If you can't, this obstruction will need to be removed, or the homeowners can pursue legal action. Karen sighed dramatically. Fine if it's that big a deal. I'll bring the paperwork to the HOA board. Martinez gave Jake a knowing look. Call the city permit office. See if anything was actually approved. Jake nodded. Already on it. As Martinez left, Karen's pleasant mask cracked for just a second. I hope you realize, she muttered, her voice low enough that only Jake and Emily could hear, you're making a big mistake. Then she turned and strolled back inside like she hadn't just threatened them. Uncovering the truth. Jake wasted no time. He called the city permit office, half expecting a long, bureaucratic nightmare. Instead, the woman on the other end sounded perplexed. Sir, I don't see any permits filed for a wall construction at your address. Jake's stomach tightened. You're sure? Maybe under Willow Creek Estates HOA? Pause. No. Nothing. Emily, listening nearby, whispered, so Karen went rogue? Jake hung up, his mind racing. If Karen had lied about the permits, she had overstepped in a huge way. That meant he had leverage. And he knew just how to use it. The HOA meeting showdown. Jake and Emily showed up early to the next HOA meeting, held in the Willow Creek Clubhouse, a sterile building with motivational posters about community togetherness, ironically positioned near a list of fines for noncompliance. Karen, standing at the podium, was in her element. As we begin today's session, she announced, I'd like to address some misguided concerns about the recent beautification project. Jake stood up. You mean the illegal wall? Karen's eyes flashed. Mr. Carter, this is not a time for interruptions. Jake walked right up to the front and held up his phone. I called the city permit office. They have no record of your so-called beautification project. That means you violated property laws. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Karen stiffened. Well, sometimes paperwork gets delayed. Nope, Jake cut her off. I also spoke to Officer Martinez. He says we have grounds for a legal claim against you and the HOA. The murmurs became outright whispers. Jake turned to the board members. Did any of you actually approve this? One of them, a nervous-looking man in a bad toupee, stammered, We thought Karen handled the permits. Karen's nostrils flared. This is an outrageous accusation. Jake smirked. Not as outrageous as what I found next. He pulled up another document, a financial record from the HOA's funds. See, I did a little digging. Turns out, the HOA paid triple the average price for this construction project. Gasps. Jake turned the nail even deeper. The contractor? Turns out it's owned by Karen's brother-in-law. Dead silence. Karen's face went ghost white. Jake folded his arms. So either you embezzled HOA money, or you used HOA funds for a personal vendetta. Either way, that wall is coming down. The beginning of the end. The next morning, a demolition crew arrived. By noon, the wall was gone, reduced to rubble. Karen, nowhere to be seen. But Jake knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not yet. The concrete wall was gone. For the first time in weeks, Jake and Emily could pull into their driveway without maneuvering around a ridiculous blockade. The destruction crew had made quick work of the wall, and now all that remained was a pile of rubble, and a fuming Karen Whitmore. Jake knew one thing for sure. Karen might have lost the battle, but the war? Oh, she wasn't done yet. The mysterious retaliation. The first strange thing happened that night. Jake and Emily were curled up on the couch watching TV when, bang! A loud metallic crash echoed outside. Jake jumped up and ran to the window. The streetlights cast long shadows across their front yard, but something was off. His trash cans were missing. Emily joined him at the window, frowning. Did a raccoon just commit grand theft garbage? Jake stepped outside with a flashlight, scanning the driveway. That's when he noticed something even weirder. The trash cans weren't missing. They were stacked, precariously balanced on top of each other, and positioned directly in the middle of their driveway. A literal barricade. Emily groaned. Oh, come on. Jake had a gut feeling about who was behind this. And sure enough, as he kicked over the tower of bins, he spotted movement across the street. Karen, standing on her porch, arms crossed, sipping from her ever-present HOA-branded coffee mug. Jake locked eyes with her. She smirked. Emily whispered, she's playing mind games. Jake exhaled. Oh, it's war now. The HOA declares war. The next morning, Jake opened the mailbox and found 3 new HOA violation notices. Violation number 1, improper trash placement. For their own trash cans which she had moved. Violation number 2, excessive driveway debris. Because of the leftover bits of concrete from her illegal wall. Violation number 3, unkempt lawn. Because, Jake was not making this up, one dandelion was growing in the grass. Emily held the papers in disbelief. This is straight-up psychological warfare. Jake didn't waste time. He marched straight to the HOA office, violations in hand, ready for battle. The HOA secretary, a nervous woman in her 50s, gave him a forced smile. Oh, Mr. Carter. Karen said you might be coming in. Jake slapped the violations on the desk. These are ridiculous. The secretary sighed, lowering her voice. Listen, most of the board is terrified of her. She pulls strings, threatens fines, and they just let her do whatever she wants. Jake leaned in. What would happen if we got rid of her? The secretary's eyes widened. You'd have to get at least 60% of the homeowners to vote her out. And she's rigged the system so most of them are too afraid to go against her. Jake grinned. Then I guess it's time to start knocking on doors. The neighborhood rebellion. Over the next week, Jake and Emily went door to door gathering support. At first, people were hesitant. Karen had ruled with an iron fist for years. But as soon as Jake mentioned the embezzled HOA funds, the illegally built wall and the petty harassment, homeowners started listening. The final straw? The elderly couple on the corner lot. Karen had fined them $500 for having an American flag on their porch. Unapproved exterior decor, she had called it. That set off an outrage. By the end of the week, Jake had over 60% of homeowners ready to sign the petition to remove Karen. It was time for the final confrontation. The HOA coup d'etat. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Karen sat at the podium, smug as ever, expecting to railroad over complaints like she always did. Jake stood up. I move to vote Karen out as HOA president. The room erupted. Karen's smile faltered. Excuse me. Jake turned, holding up the signed petition. I have over 60% of homeowners in agreement. You're done, Karen. The room burst into applause. Karen's face twisted in fury. This is a conspiracy. Jake smiled. No, Karen. This is democracy. The HOA board, now emboldened, took the vote. Final count. Karen was out. The sweet, sweet aftermath. Karen stormed out of the meeting, fuming, but the real cherry on top? 3 days later, the city launched an official audit of HOA funds. Turns out, Karen hadn't just embezzled money from the wall project. She had been pocketing HOA funds for years. She was facing serious legal trouble. The HOA? Completely restructured. Fines were rolled back. Dumb rules were scrapped. And Jake? Jake watched with satisfaction as a for sale sign popped up in Karen's front yard. Emily nudged him. Think she'll find a new neighborhood? Jake grinned. Oh, I'm sure she'll try. A week later, as they were enjoying a peaceful Karen-free weekend, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's old house. Out stepped the new homeowners. A young couple holding leashes. Attached to 3 massive Great Danes. Jake and Emily burst into laughter. Justice? Jake Carter had never been the kind of guy to relish someone else's downfall. But watching Karen Whitmore's reign of terror crumble before his eyes? That was pure satisfaction. The petition had worked. Karen was officially removed as HOA president. The city audit was underway, and the once untouchable tyrant was facing serious legal trouble for embezzling HOA funds. But just as Jake and Emily thought their nightmare was over, they were dead wrong. As Karen? She wasn't going down without a fight. The final act of desperation. It started 3 nights after Karen's removal. Jake and Emily had just settled into their Karen-free routine. No more bogus fines. No more power struggles. No more petty tyranny over mulch color. Then at 3 a.m. a sound jerked Jake awake. A soft metallic scraping. Then a low, dull thud. Jake sat up, heart hammering. Did you hear that? Emily groggily rubbed her eyes. Hey. What? Another thud. Jake grabbed his phone and crept to the window. He peeked through the blinds, and his blood ran cold. Karen, dressed in all black, crouched near their driveway. And she was holding a shovel. Jake's brain short-circuited. No freaking way. Emily stumbled to his side and gasped. Is she trying to rebuild the wall? Jake didn't waste time. He hit record on his phone, then threw open the front door. HOA, he shouted. Karen froze, caught mid-scoop of fresh concrete mix. For a moment they just stared at each other. Jake in his pajama pants, Karen looking like a cartoon villain caught in the act. Then, in the most hilariously unhinged move of all time, Karen dropped the shovel and bolted. She took off full sprint down the street, barefoot, disappearing into the darkness like some kind of deranged HOA cryptid. Emily choked back laughter. She just took off like a raccoon caught in a garbage can. Jake was still in shock. She was trying to put the wall back up. Emily snorted. That's it. She's officially lost it. Jake sighed, shaking his head. Guess we're calling the cops. The arrest of HOA Karen. When the police arrived, Jake showed them the footage. Officer Martinez, who had become a regular presence in their battle against Karen, sighed deeply. This woman does not know when to quit. The cops reviewed the evidence, nodded, and then did something Jake hadn't expected. They drove straight to Karen's house and arrested her on the spot. Turns out, trespassing with intent to cause property damage was a criminal offense. As Karen was being escorted to the squad car, she locked eyes with Jake. Her face twisted in fury. You think you've won? She spat. You think this is over? Jake crossed his arms, shaking his head. Karen, it was over weeks ago. You just haven't accepted it yet. She struggled against the cuffs. You ruined my life. Jake shrugged. No, Karen. You ruined your own life. As the police drove her away, a few neighbors stepped outside to watch. Some whispered. Others cheered. And just like that, Karen was gone. The aftermath of the HOA war. With Karen officially out of the picture, the neighborhood transformed overnight. The new HOA board, led by a reasonable, non-psychotic president named Linda, undid years of ridiculous policies. No more fines for trash cans being out 2 minutes late. No more mandatory mulch colors. No more bans on flags, bird feeders, or unsightly driveway shapes. Jake and Emily celebrated with a backyard barbecue, inviting all the neighbors Karen had tormented. People shared horror stories of Karen's reign. She once fined me for having a pink flamingo lawn ornament, one man said. She made me repaint my fence 3 times because the undertones were too aggressive, another woman added. The biggest surprise? Half the people had been too scared to speak up before. Karen made everyone think she had all the power, Linda admitted. But the second people stood up to her, she crumbled. Jake raised a toast. To never dealing with an unhinged HOA dictator again. Cheers erupted. Karen's final fate. A month later, Jake got an email from Linda. Subject: Karen's official charges. Turns out, Karen's financial embezzlement was worse than anyone thought. She had been funneling HOA money into a personal vacation fund for years. She was facing multiple lawsuits. And the best part? She had to sell her house to cover legal fees. Jake saw the for sale sign go up in her yard and couldn't wipe the grin off his face. Justice served. The perfect ironic ending. A few weeks later, as Jake was mowing his now unfined, freely growing lawn, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's old house. He and Emily watched as the new homeowners stepped out. A young couple, leading 3 massive Great Danes. Emily gasped. Jake. It's happening. Jake barely held back laughter. Karen had hated dogs. She had banned homeowners from having more than one. No. Her former house belonged to 3 of them. Jake clapped Emily on the back. Poetic justice. The final piece. As the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, Jake and Emily sat on their porch, drinks in hand, finally at peace. No more battles. No more ridiculous fines. No more petty revenge schemes. Just quiet, suburban life. Exactly what they had wanted when they moved in. Emily smiled. We actually made this place better. Jake nodded, stretching out. And all it took was one deranged HOA Karen losing her mind. They clinked glasses. And for the first time in months, life in Willow Creek Estates was finally normal. If you enjoyed this wild, hilarious, and totally insane HOA drama, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more crazy entitled people stories. Have you ever dealt with a Karen or a power-hungry HOA? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you want more epic tales of justice served, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay compliant, or don't.